Have you ever noticed how the tiniest things can carry the heaviest memories? I often think about that. How a warm glance across the kitchen or a small hand squeezed in mine says more about love than all the grand gestures in the world. Sometimes, I suppose, those little things become so woven into our daily lives that we scarcely see them at all, until one disappears, and the emptiness it leaves is far too loud to ignore. Most people, when they picture a grandmother, imagine soft hands dusted with flour or a calm voice humming old lullabies. Perhaps that's true. My hands have rolled countless pie crusts, and my lap has held 3 generations of little ones who grew up far too fast for my liking. My days often begin with a gentle chorus of birds outside the kitchen window, a sound so familiar I hardly notice it, and the warm sunlight squeezing through faded curtains. On those quiet mornings, I'd set the table, humming softly while laying out mismatched mugs for whoever wandered in first. I've always believed in simple routines. Grocery lists held up by magnet clips, Sunday calls to my sister, the silly habit of folding napkins with a touch of extra care. These habits are like the stitches on a well-worn quilt, holding the fabric of family together even when the edges start to fray. You might think that at my age, I would be immune to surprises. But life waits for no one. If there's anything I hope you take from me, it's that the heart keeps learning, no matter how old the eyes. Trust, especially, is not a lesson reserved for the young. It's a quiet friend you tend to over the years, like a potted plant stretching toward a sunny window. Sometimes it thrives, sometimes it withers a little, but it always needs attention. I remember the feeling, not of suspicion but of comfort, when I'd slip my handbag under the kitchen table. That battered purse has crossed a lot of thresholds. Church doors, baseball fields, doctor's offices, every holiday dinner you can name. My grandchildren laugh at its stubborn zipper and how each pocket tells its own story. A faded receipt from the first store to open in our neighborhood. A dollar bill folded just so for emergencies. A photo of my late husband, his grin forever tucked behind my library card. Family has always been my anchor. My children grew up faster than I could blink, and now their children rush through my front door hunting for snacks, stories, or the feeling that, just for a moment, nothing bad could happen under Grandma's roof. My traditions may seem old-fashioned. I believe in handwritten cards and always remembering birthdays, in calling to check on whoever's missing from Sunday dinner. I still tie a little ribbon around special gifts, just because. People roll their eyes, but I know these are the things they'll remember when my stories are only echoes. The day everything changed, the sky looked the same as always, blue as a robin's egg, puffy clouds, quiet promise of spring. I was tidying up after breakfast, smiling to myself about my youngest granddaughter's wild idea of putting sprinkles on eggs. The house was filled with familiar sounds. A kettle whistling, squeaky floorboards complaining as someone tiptoed down the hallway. The television softly reporting another day's headlines no one would remember next week. I had been readying myself for some errands. I keep a small notebook, blue cover, lined pages, a little frayed along the spine, on which I jot down what we're out of. Milk, bread, maybe some fresh flowers for the table if I felt indulgent. It's my way of keeping life in order, of making sure nothing important slips through the cracks, especially in a house where a lost sock can become a small crisis. But that morning, I couldn't shake a faint restlessness. A parent knows, long after their own children are grown, the difference between peace and the hush that comes before a storm. As I reached for my purse beneath the table, I hesitated. It wasn't in its usual spot. It had shifted a few inches, lying open instead of clasped shut. My first thought was annoyance. Why can't anyone put things back where they found them? But as I rifled through the pockets and found my wallet, I had the oddest feeling, a flicker of doubt buried under years of trust. I peered inside, counting the cards by touch before even looking. My breath stuttered for a heartbeat when I noticed my bank card wasn't there. It's a small thing, a sliver of plastic nestled among receipts and coupons, but its absence rang loud as a bell. For years, I've lectured everyone about the importance of keeping track, told stories of lost purses and canceled checks, tried to pass on what little lessons stick when you're the older one in the room. The room felt smaller, daylight sharper on the kitchen tiles. I sat for a moment, just listening, the chirp of the clock, the whisper of the refrigerator. I thought of every person who'd passed through my kitchen lately, my daughter, my grandson, The neighbor who stops by to share her garden tomatoes. I tried to recall if I'd used the card yesterday, but the memory was slippery, a shadow flitting at the edge of thought. Did I misplace it? Was it my own forgetfulness? Age plays cruel jokes sometimes. I'm old enough to admit that. Still, this didn't feel like an honest mistake. My habits are too deeply etched. The card is always there, always tucked in the same slot. Always handled with care because small things are precious when you live alone. 1,000 explanations crowded my thoughts. Perhaps I'd set it down in the car, perhaps it was mixed into laundry, or perhaps someone I loved had needed it and hadn't asked. That possibility hurt most of all, crawling beneath my skin. I wanted to believe the best, but sometimes wisdom means daring to see the worst, even when it wears a familiar face. So there I sat. Hands trembling just a little, the world still spinning through its usual breakfast noises, while in my chest, something delicate shifted out of place. It's funny, truly, how what's missing can fill a room much faster than what's present. And as the silence grew, I felt the weight of all those years of trust, wondering if I still had the strength and the faith to carry it. That's the thing about small losses. They bloom in the quietest corners, rooting themselves in all you thought you knew. I closed my eyes, humming half a tune, unsure which feeling would surface first. Hope or dread? I suppose that's where this story really begins, with a question hanging in the air, as gentle and heavy as a grandmother's sigh. The strange part is how an ordinary day can echo with everything you cherish, even as it quietly slips away from you. I woke up to my usual alarm. The old radio on my nightstand, the one my late husband fixed half a dozen times. The announcer's familiar voice talked about morning traffic and the weather, which I only half listened to as I shuffled into my slippers. My house is never fully quiet, not with pipes humming and birds fussing outside, but there was a peculiar stillness that morning, one I couldn't name. I moved from room to room, collecting laundry, checking windows, feeling the sturdy creak of the floor under each step. The walls are dotted with family photos, so many that I sometimes have to squint and remember what year a child lost his 2 front teeth, or when my daughter first wore her hair short. Strange, how a face can stay the same for decades and then, without warning, seem suddenly full of years. My granddaughter, Ellie, called while I was pouring my first cup of coffee. She chatted about her math test, about how the neighbor's dog had puppies, and asked if I still had grandma's cookies for her after school. I assured her I did, though I'd eaten one with my coffee, just to test them, I said with a chuckle. Her laughter warmed me, that easy, unguarded sound. We talked about her mother, who was behind on sleep again, and about my son's new job. These calls are the heartbeat of my mornings, their simple rhythm steadying me. After breakfast, I sat at the kitchen table and started on my weekly grocery list. My fridge door is a map of memories, report cards, clippings, a drawing of a crooked house from a grandchild long grown. I added apples and chicken thighs and paused, pen in hand, as I thought about buying flowers for the dining table. Not something I ever splurged on, but spring calls for a little joy. Just for flowers, I thought, remembering my own mother's habit of picking a bunch of violets from the yard and arranging them in a jelly jar. My oldest friend, Beverly, called too, worried about her knees and sharing the latest bit of neighborhood gossip. We have known each other since we both answered to Mommy instead of our first names. Sometimes, when she laughs at something silly, I remember us as girls, quick young things sprinting through sprinklers. Now we trade recipes and gentle warnings about watching too much television alone at night. And so the morning passed. Folded towels stacked in neat little piles, sliced fruit for snack time, a reminder jotted on my arm to pay the electricity bill. The sunlight caught on dust motes, swirling lazily through the kitchen, just as I opened my purse to get the bill slip. My hand moved automatically, riffling for my wallet. And that's when I remembered the card, or rather, the aching absence of it. I stopped short, my fingers resting on old gum wrappers and a badge from a charity walk. I took everything out, lining it on the table, a small collection of everyday clutter. A movie ticket from January, penny candies, a faded tissue. The card was still missing, its place in my wallet as empty as the seat my husband once filled beside me at breakfast. I tried to recall if I'd been careless. Maybe I'd tucked it somewhere unusual, distracted by something else. I asked myself if perhaps I'd mentioned it to anyone, if in a moment of forgetfulness, I'd offered to lend it for a quick errand. But nothing came to mind, and the more I searched, the more unsettled I felt. I didn't want to frighten anyone. My children have busy lives, and the last thing I ever wished to do is become a problem to be solved. I called my daughter, keeping my tone light, asking her about her day instead of mentioning the missing card. She talked about her own worries, doctor's appointments, forgotten lunches, and I listened, nodding along, giving advice when she asked for it. Grandmas learn to listen more than they speak. It's one of those gifts that only grows with age. Eventually, I found myself staring at my own reflection in the kitchen window. A face softer than I remembered, eyes searching mine for answers I could not give. I went to the living room and sat with my knitting. The rhythm of the needles, over, under, loop, pull, soothed me, though my mind stayed restless. I could not help wondering if the world outside had somehow shifted when I wasn't looking. If something precious had slipped away while I was busy baking cookies and folding dishcloths. When the mail arrived, I barely looked at the stack of envelopes. I checked for the card again, this time moving methodically through every drawer and shelf, the way you do when a tooth falls out or you're sure you left your keys in your coat pocket. I retraced my steps to the mailbox, to the garden gate, even to the little corner of the porch where the neighbor's cat likes to sleep. For a brief moment, I laughed at myself, an old woman turning the house upside down over a lost card. But as the hours wore on, a quiet knot formed in my stomach. I remembered my own grandmother's advice. Never ignore what your heart is trying to tell you, even if you'd rather not listen. The unease didn't fade. In fact, it grew with each passing minute, like a small storm gathering strength far beyond the hills. When the house was quiet again, late afternoon sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor, I sat alone at the table, hands folded, unsure what to do next. I thought about every person I love, about how trust is built over years but can falter in a single moment. I closed my eyes and tried to believe that everything would turn out all right. Outside, the world continued in its gentle rhythm. Children's shouts from down the block, a delivery truck groaning to a halt, the faint ring of the ice cream man's bell. Still, inside my home, something felt unsteady, fragile in a way I never expected. The familiar world I'd relied upon for so long had shifted, if only by an inch. Sometimes that's all it takes. I told myself not to worry, not yet. I would hold on to hope a little longer. But in the soft hush of that late afternoon, for the first time in a long while, I realized that even a grandmother's surest routines can't always keep the world from changing. You'd think that after so many years, I'd be used to life's loose threads, those tiny mysteries no one seems able to solve. But that evening, as darkness crept across the kitchen counters and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, I found myself tangled in doubts I couldn't simply brush aside. There's a certain ache in not knowing, the ache of waiting, of hoping for the truth to show itself, while fearing what it might cost you. Dinner felt quieter than usual. I set the table with plates for one, my hands moving through the motions almost without thought. There's comfort in routine, but that night, the familiar clink of silverware seemed to echo my unease. My mind traced old paths, memories of lively family dinners where voices overlapped, laughter spilling like sunlight through the windows. These days, it's mostly just me and the whir of old appliances, along with a phone that rings too seldom. Every small noise in the house made me wonder if someone would finally call out, "Grandma, I found it." But no voice answered my silent wishes. I drank a cup of chamomile tea, cradling the warmth in my palms, and remembered the advice my own mother gave me. Be patient with what you don't yet understand. I tried, truly I did. But each heartbeat pressed another question to the surface. Maybe you know what that's like. The quiet suspicion you want to ignore. It's not about blame or bitterness, but about the gut sense that something's out of place. I retraced every event of the day, where I'd walked, who I'd spoken to, even what I'd worn. I turned each detail over in my mind, looking for comfort in common sense. But the card's absence wasn't the kind of problem that would fix itself with a good night's sleep or a few gentle words. Part of me wanted to call my daughter, confess my worry, and talk it through. But I hesitated, afraid of sounding silly or mistrustful. After all, families are built on faith, the kind you offer even when you're not sure it's deserved. I didn't want to bring doubt into the home we'd worked so hard to keep safe. And so, I sat with my questions instead, letting them whisper their worries in the stillness. The next morning, I tried to fill the hours with chores. I watered the plants, dusted picture frames, organized recipe cards that held decades worth of secrets. But every task seemed unfinished, paused by a thought I couldn't quite dismiss. I remembered advice I'd given my grandchildren. How important it is to double-check, to think twice before accusing someone. Trust is fragile, I told them, like a pie crust that crumbles if you press just a little too hard. Now those words returned to me with unexpected weight. Neighbors stopped by with leftover cake and stories from down the street. I smiled and thanked them, listening closely for hints, for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing. The world outside seemed so ordinary, so unchanged. Only my own heart beat a little faster. I wondered, did I forget? Or had someone needed something they couldn't ask me for? Which would hurt more, to admit my mistake or to discover a loved one's secret? I could have asked outright. But love sometimes means holding back, giving space for others to come forward in their own time. I left my purse in plain sight, hoping someone might notice and quietly return what was missing. I paid close attention to how my family acted when they visited. Was anyone quieter than usual? Did they avoid my eyes or linger too long at the kitchen counter? Each smile and gesture took on new meaning, a wordless code I strained to decipher. As night fell again, the unanswered questions lingered with me at the table. I wrote a note in my journal, something I've done for years when I can't sleep. Remember to trust, but watch carefully. Remember to hope, but guard your heart. My handwriting trembled a bit, betraying my agitation. I didn't want suspicion to take over. I wanted more than anything, for love to win out over fear. Sometimes, when sleep won't come, I knit or read old letters. On this night, I folded a quilt that had comforted generations, pressing the seams flat, letting my mind wander the colorful patches. I remembered arguments settled over tea, apologies whispered in the hallway, forgiveness offered before the sun rose again. Families survive on small acts of mercy as much as on truth. I considered locking away my doubts, pretending nothing was amiss. But the heart rarely allows that kind of peace when it senses a hidden hurt. Instead, I chose patience, a seed planted with hope that would take time to grow. I decided I would wait one more day. If the card didn't reappear, if no explanation came, then I would find the courage to ask. For now, I would hold on to faith in the people I loved, believing that answers sometimes take the shape of silence before arriving in words. That's the challenge of growing older. Learning which worries to speak aloud, and which to keep safe in your heart until they ripen into understanding. I wasn't sure which path to choose, but as I blew out the lamp beside my bed, I made a promise to myself. I would be gentle, with my family, and with my own uncertainty. Perhaps, in the morning, the world would make just a bit more sense. And so I drifted into dreams, questions wrapping softly around me, suspended between worry and hope, waiting, as only a grandmother can, for the truth to gently find its way home. I suppose there's a point, subtle but unmistakable, when questions stop whispering and become demands you can no longer ignore. That's how I found myself, one uneasy morning, sitting at the edge of my bed, cardless purse in my lap, staring straight into the unsettling heart of doubt. I'd measured and remeasured my own memory, weighed every possibility, hoped for easy answers that never came. All that remained was the need to know, and the fear of what the truth might cost. I called my daughter, voice steady though my nerves flickered like candlelight. "Honey, did you happen to see my card anywhere?" I had rehearsed this question in the quiet of many nights, looking for a gentle way to wrap concern in love. For a beat, there was only the background noise of her household. Children, television, a dog barking. Then she hesitated, too long for comfort, before answering. "No, Mom," she said, careful, her tone textured with something I couldn't name. When a mother senses a change in her child's words, she notices. Even after all these years, I could feel the sigh behind her denial, the way someone does when they're searching for what is true, afraid to bring disappointment into the world. I thanked her, said it was probably nothing, and hung up. Still, my suspicion burrowed deeper. Later that afternoon, my grandson Michael stopped by, all restless energy and gentle manners. He helped me move a heavy chair, offered to fetch groceries, and lingered unusually long near my purse. I watched him, not with accusation but with a grandmother's heartbreak. The conflict between wanting to believe the best and having to protect yourself, even from those you love most. The tipping point came with the ring of my telephone, the bank's automated voice stumbling awkwardly through a list of purchases I didn't recognize. Small transactions, the kind that almost slip by unnoticed, flowers from a shop on Main Street, a couple of snacks at the gas station. My old sense of order, all those careful records and grocery lists, screamed that something was amiss. I called the bank, hands trembling, voice growing firmer as politeness gave way to necessity. No, I did not authorize those transactions. Yes, I would like the card blocked. There's no guidebook for moments like these. The voice on the other end thanked me for confirming, promised a freeze on my account, and explained a process that felt both technical and impersonal. But I was grateful for the distance, for a conversation where no one's heart could break in real time. A part of me had hoped that by blocking the card, I'd bring the whole ordeal to a close. But life, I've learned, rarely wraps up so neatly. The next call came from the police station. A calm officer who explained that the local flower shop's security camera had captured footage of the last transaction. Would you be willing to come down and view it? He asked, as kindly as such a request permits. The police station was colder than I imagined, its hallways echoing like the blanks in my memory. I sat across from the officer, hands folded in my lap, knees jittery beneath my skirt. He pressed play. The camera footage flickered to life, grainy, black and white, a lonely register by the window. And there, unmistakably, was my Michael, the boy who once painted pictures at my kitchen table, sliding my card across the counter with his head bowed low. I don't know how to describe that moment. It wasn't pure anger, nor simple disappointment. It was a slow, sorrowful unraveling. The realization that every moment of trust, every remembered birthday, could be bruised by a single, secret act. I saw, in the small movements of my grandson's hands, a familiar tenderness. The way he cradled the bouquet as if apologizing with every petal. Did he mean to hurt me? Or was this the desperate choice of someone lost in his own troubles? The officer's voice broke the silence. We'll follow up and contact you with further steps. A freeze order on your account is in place, and we'll notify you if any charges move forward. I nodded, numb, thanking him as though politeness might paper over the fresh wound in my heart. Walking home, the world looked much as it always had. Mailboxes askew, the smell of cut lawns in the air, but I felt changed, aged by more than passing years. That evening, as I sat in my living room, I played the scene over and over in my mind. I pictured Michael as a child, feet swinging from my kitchen chairs, laughter bubbling from his chest as he waited for cookies to cool. I remembered the trust I'd given, the lessons I'd tried to teach about honesty and asking for help. Had he forgotten? Had I failed him by being too generous, too quick to forgive, too reluctant to see when someone I loved was in need? I considered calling him, but what would I say? That I was heartbroken? That I wished he'd just asked? That sometimes, the hardest part of love is believing in forgiveness, even when it feels impossible. The words crowded my chest, but I kept them inside for the night, unsure who needed comfort most, him or me. I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, the very same spot where I'd noticed the missing card, and cried soft tears for everything that had been lost without warning. I grieved not for the money or the spoiled errands, but for the delicate weave of trust, now threaded through with uncertainty. Sometimes, people say that discovering the truth sets you free. Maybe it does, but first it can strip you bare, leaving you cold and uncertain in your own home. I leaned my head in my hands, and let the silence cradle my sorrow, watching the first pale hints of morning slip across the counter. Even then, some part of me clung to hope, the hope that family can mend, that hearts may find their way back, no matter how far they wander. But in that moment between darkness and dawn, I allowed myself simply to ache, for what I'd lost, for what I still hoped to recover, and for the love that, even hurt, refuses to let go. Have you ever stood at the edge of a quiet morning, knowing you'd never see the world quite the same way again? That's what it felt like for me, in those days after the truth finally rose to the surface. Betrayal leaves behind a peculiar hush, not the loud clamor of anger you expect, but a gentle, persistent ache, woven through with memories of better times. I woke each day hoping for answers, and though some arrived, others stayed beyond reach. But life waits for no one, and even heavy hearts have to keep moving. After the bank calls ceased and the police finished their questions, the house felt strangely still. I noticed the little things. Sunlight falling differently through the kitchen window, the grocery list untouched by my shaking hand, and the chair by the table sitting emptier than before. Michael didn't visit for a while. I told myself he needed time, maybe even more than I did. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't something you prepare for. It's a kind of strength that seeps in slowly, like the warmth in a loaf of bread coming fresh from the oven. My daughter came over the next Sunday, her arms full of casseroles and apologies she struggled to voice. She sat with me at the table where so much of our family's joy, and now our pain, was shared. There were tears, yes, but also long stretches of silence where we just listened to each other breathe. She tried to explain her side, how she'd missed the signs of Michael's troubles, how hard it had been to balance trust and worry, and how, in all these years, family meant everything to her too. I thought of every story I'd told her as a child, every scraped knee I'd cleaned, every bedtime promise that tomorrow would be easier. Time doesn't give us answers, it offers only chances. I listened, nodded, and before she left, gripped her hand a little tighter than usual. A silent signal that love, though bruised, was not broken. Some days, I found myself rehearsing what I'd say to Michael. My words changed every time. Sometimes stern, sometimes soft with longing. At last he came by one afternoon, tall and tired, eyes red-rimmed and full of regret. He brought flowers, daisies, my favorites, bought with his own money this time. He stumbled through an apology, voice shaking, telling me why he did it, how lost he'd felt, how sorry he was. I listened, letting each word settle between us. After so many years, I knew better than to mistake an apology for a solution. What mattered most was the effort, the hard, stumbling steps it takes to come home again after you've strayed. I told him about trust, how it's built in layers, how it can be cracked but not erased. I told him what my mother once told me. Forgiveness is a door you open again and again, even when your arms are weary. We talked for a long time, the kitchen clock ticking out its slow reassurance. I asked Michael what he needed, not just to fix what he'd done, but to rebuild himself. I told him about mistakes I'd made, about the things I wished I could ask forgiveness for. Those bits of truth you only dare share when the worst has already happened. We made a plan. He would work, save, and repay every dollar, not because the money mattered most, but because the act would help him find his footing again. That night, after he left, I sat at the window, watching dusk settle on the neighborhood. I was flooded with memories. Birthday parties, snowstorms, laughter spilling into the yard, Sunday dinners drawn out by stories and the clatter of forks. I let myself feel the sorrow, but also the gratitude, for second chances, for the patience I'd learned to hold, for the love that stitched our family together despite all the frayed edges. In the days that followed, I shared gentle guidance, nothing grand. Reminders about the strength it takes to admit you're wrong, about how setting boundaries is another way of caring for your heart. I called an old friend, made soup, folded quilts that had warmed more than one generation. Life nudged slowly back into place, a little altered, but no less precious. When family came to visit, there was a new caution in our affection, a respect for the fragile work of healing. We talked, not about the incident but about small joys. Ellie's latest drawing, the smell of rain on sidewalks, what to plant in the garden come spring. We began carefully, to laugh together again. I thought often about what I wanted my family and anyone listening to learn from my story. That trust cannot be blindly given, but it can be rebuilt. That love outlasts mistakes, but only if you tend to it, patiently and honestly. And that sometimes, holding on means letting go, of anger, of certainty, of the way you hoped things would always be. As the season turned and the first green shoots appeared in the yard, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing pain. It was about growing something new in its place. I took comfort in my rituals. Tea at sunrise, a call to Beverly, the quiet peace that comes from knowing you've done what you could, and that, at least for today, you're all right. To you who's listened to my tale, carry your own stories gently. Call the people you love. Guard your heart, but never close it. Life is never quite as safe as we hope, nor as broken as we fear. And even when trust is tested, the hope for kindness can renew itself, if only you open your hands to receive it. So I end this chapter a little wiser, a little more tender, and ready for what comes next. Not as the same grandmother I was before, but as someone who understands that, sometimes, life's greatest lessons wait on the other side of heartbreak.